In the introduction of your book, Cultures of Mass Tourism, we read, mass tourism is thin on meaning and ideology and very dense on physicality and sensuality. And you also write that your focus is on the productive effects of mass tourism rather than on its ideological underpinnings. So this division between sensuality and ideology, I understand it. However, isn't it possible to say that some of these productive effects also have an ideological dimension, which ought to be looked into? Or should we altogether dismiss any kind of ideological implications? If we do that, one, aren't we falling back on the initial premise that mass tourism is simply banal and irrelevant because it has no ideological implications? No? Aren't we losing critical edge too?
Very good question. I think the point here is we cannot make sense of tourism if we ask what it means. The most important question of mass tourism is what it does. And what it does to, I'm thinking there's an article that you have not mentioned, but actually will complement that very well, which is the one on the family. It looks very kind of blasé, really, the title, but it's actually quite important because actually mass tourism is a space that does family. It's actually a space that everybody goes as a family. And it's a space where we are together as a family. So the most blasé space in the world is actually linked with one of the most one of these more deep concepts in our society, which is this notion of the family, which actually is losing ground in our everyday spaces. We don't have classical families anymore, or if we do, our families are completely our families are becoming very, very stressed out because you are here, you are not going to see your children until, I don't know, in the evening, but then they have basketball, so we don't have that family space anymore. So, but the mass tourism actually do. So why I bring this example of the family? Because what mass tourism matters is for what it does, often more for what it means. And that was the focus I wanted to emphasize here. One of the aspects of what it does, which are more important, has to do with the body. This is the context of the beach is the only place in society where we'll get pretty much naked or semi-naked in front of others. So we have completely dress codes, completely change our attitudes towards the bodies and things like that. So matters in the terms of the body, in particular within the context of Northern Europe, where you don't undress because simply it's too cold, and a good summer day is 20 degrees. Mass tourism brings a completely new dimensions on to do with consumer culture, of to do with excess, of to do with embodiment, pleasure, all that kind of things. And this is why I think the focus should be there. Your question was going further than that. You were talking about are not reproducing another binarism by focusing on the banal. The answer is probably yes and no. No, in the sense that I think power is, in a Foucauldian sense, if we take a Foucauldian sense of power, power is spread out, and politics is spread out. So ideology is not some structural principle out there, but it's actually practiced or is performed. Is it has to be done. Is in all these political and power issues are all spread out throughout through our practice, through our bodies, through the ways of doing, and all that kind of thing. So if we want to find power, ideology, and politics, we need to go to these micro practices more than anything else. I still think that is probably a question to ask about. I'm not taking the critical out of it. Probably I'm a little bit here, and probably I should be reintroduced somehow. But I think there's a lot of work to be done on that level that's necessary.
To conclude, to finish this conversation, what do you see on the agenda of tourism research? What should we do next?
I don't know, let me know, because I will do it. What we should do next? I think for me, the important thing here is to place tourism within the context of social science rather than to make tourism a unique topic that deserves attention on its own. And to realize that societies are increasingly, mobility is an increasingly part of the way contemporary societies are organized. It means that tourism becomes pretty much everything and nothing. Therefore, what is the point of studying tourism? Perhaps the point here is, I think that's what John Ury did in his late work. I think we need to emphasize more mobility and more leisure, perhaps, than actually tourism. Tourism matters, is important, is necessary, but the actual category of the tourist doesn't say us very much anymore. Because the tourist is me, the tourist is you, the tourist is absolutely everything, and everything, everywhere is tourism. Having said that, I think we need to be careful about doing research that goes towards a direction of an increasingly mobile world, because it's not. Mobile world is not increasingly mobile. The world is become crossed with flies of mobility and then process of demobilization. There's very serious process of that actually demobilize our societies, and therefore tourism becomes more of a privilege than a right. I think there's a huge avenue here about social. I'm not sure to call it social exclusion, but how tourism actually can go backwards. The end of tourism, in the sense, not just because everything is tourism, like the end of history, but because actually there is resorts that people don't go anymore. There is places that have been abandoned. There is people that cannot travel anymore for leisure. Americans do not travel that much often for leisure because they work a lot, you know. This notion of going a month and a half on holidays, that's not there anymore. So how is all that kind of things? I think there is an issue there to place tourism in the middle of society in both directions. So I think our work should go more towards leisure and the political side of leisure. How in our societies leisure has become a biopolitical tool, how a lot of, even if you think about the recent process of Barcelona, one of the things that stands out is how leisurely the protests are and how there's no revolution without a smile, like they say, right? So leisure becomes an important question through a lot of our questions in our society are organized. So I think this is an important topic that we should explore more towards how we actually do leisure. And that links to another one, which I think we should as well, how actually the way we travel, the way we do leisure change, how, and that is at the center, I think, for example, of phenomena, what happens in the central of Lisbon right now. How, for example, what people used to go to Magaluf to party, now they go to central Lisbon, or they go to Barcelona, or they go to Newcastle. So how the way we're using the city, the way we're using the tourist space is changing, and I think there's a lot of interesting work to be there. Finally, other topics that I particularly like, I'm very interested in notions of emotion, notions of embodiment. I think there's a lot of work there. Materiality is something I have talked not very much in this interview, but how we do tourism through things, the mobile phone, for example. We are not just traveling with the mobile phone, we travel through the mobile phone. There's a lot of issues about technology, not just in a deterministic way, but technology, how it's empowering completely different ways of doing, which are, the work, for example, of German malls on Airbnbs and hospitality, how hospitality is transformed, how the relations of hosting and guesting are transformed. So there's lots of things there. Space tourism maybe, but probably that's as well about more dreaming than anything else.
Okay.
Well,
thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure. It has been a deep pleasure.